I almost didn't take that flight. I had been traveling for 11 days straight, moving from one city to another for work, living out of a suitcase, eating airport food, sleeping in hotel rooms that all looked exactly the same, and by the time I got to the gate for my final flight home, I was so exhausted that I could barely remember what my own apartment looked like. The flight was delayed by 40 minutes, so I found a seat near the window, put my headphones in, and just stared at the planes on the runway. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I was just done. Done with the trip, done with the noise, done with the feeling that my life had somehow become a series of departures and arrivals with nothing real in between. When we finally landed, I was one of the last people off the plane. The baggage carousel was already moving by the time I got there, and I spotted my suitcase almost immediately, or at least I thought I did. It was a medium-sized navy blue hard-shell case, the kind that half the world seems to own, with a small scratch on the left corner that I recognized instantly. I pulled it off the belt, wheeled it to the exit, and went home. I didn't open it until the next morning. I had just made coffee and was planning to unpack before work when I noticed that the zipper was on the wrong side. My suitcase had a small leather tag on the right handle, this one didn't. I told myself I had probably just grabbed it in a different position, because I was tired and it made sense that my brain would find an explanation before it found the truth. But when I opened it, the truth was immediate and impossible to ignore. These were not my clothes. Not my toiletries, not my books, not any of the things I had carefully packed 11 days ago. Instead, I was looking at neatly folded shirts, a pair of men's shoes wrapped in a plastic bag, a paperback novel with a boarding pass tucked inside as a bookmark, and right on top of everything, placed carefully like it had been put there deliberately, a photograph. I picked it up. It was a man, maybe late 30s, dark hair, the kind of tired smile that people have when they're happy but exhausted at the same time. And in his arms, pressed against his chest with both of her small hands gripping his jacket, was a little girl. Maybe 5 or 6 years old, with the same dark hair as him, laughing at something just outside the frame. I stood there in my kitchen holding that photograph for a long time. And then I looked back into the suitcase and noticed something I had missed the first time. Tucked into the mesh pocket on the inside of the lid, folded into quarters, was a piece of paper. Not a receipt, not a document. A drawing. Done in crayon, purple and yellow and a very ambitious shade of orange, and at the bottom, in the careful uneven handwriting of a child who was still learning how her letters worked, it said, "Come home soon, Daddy. I miss you." I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, still in my pajamas, still holding that piece of paper, and I felt something shift inside me in a way I hadn't expected on a Tuesday morning before my first cup of coffee. I didn't know this man. I didn't know his daughter. But something about that drawing, the purple crayon, the crooked letters, the absolute simple certainty of a child who just wanted her father to come home, made me feel like I needed to find him. Not just to return the suitcase, but because that drawing deserved to get back to the person it was made for. So I picked up my phone, and I called the airline. The woman at the airline was patient but not particularly optimistic. She explained that they could log the mix-up, pass my contact information to the other passenger, and hope that he had also reported the mistake. There was no guarantee, she said, and no timeline. It could take days. It took 4 hours. My phone rang that same afternoon, a number I didn't recognize, and when I picked up, the voice on the other end was calm and a little careful, like someone who wasn't sure how this conversation was supposed to go. He said, "Hi, I think you have my suitcase." His name was Daniel. He had landed that morning on a different flight, realized the mistake almost immediately, and had spent most of the day on the phone with the airline trying to track down his bag. He was polite, straightforward, and somewhere underneath the practicality of the conversation I could hear something that sounded like relief. Not just about the suitcase. We arranged to meet the following evening at a coffee shop near the airport, somewhere neutral and easy, and I spent probably more time than I should admit thinking about what I was going to say when I got there. I got there first. I ordered a coffee, sat down at a corner table, and put his suitcase next to mine so he would recognize them immediately. When he walked in, he looked exactly like the photograph, same tired smile, same dark hair, slightly more dressed up than I had expected for a suitcase exchange, which I noticed and then told myself not to read into. He sat down across from me, and the first thing he did was reach into his jacket and pull out my leather tag. The one from my suitcase handle. He said, "I found this inside when I was checking to make sure nothing was missing. I thought you might want it back." It was such a small thing. But something about the fact that he had kept it, carried it, brought it specifically to give back to me, it made me smile in a way I hadn't expected. We stayed at that coffee shop for 2 hours. He told me about his daughter, Sophia, who was 6 years old and had made that drawing the morning he left for his trip because she always made him something to take with him so he wouldn't feel lonely on the plane. He told me she had asked him approximately 47 times since he got home whether he had found the drawing, and that he had told her it was safe and on its way back. I told him I had found it on top of everything else, folded into quarters, and that I had sat on my kitchen floor in my pajamas holding it for longer than I was comfortable admitting to a stranger. He laughed at that. A real laugh, not a polite one. He told me his wife had passed away 2 years earlier, quietly and without making it the center of the conversation, the way people do when they have learned to carry something heavy without putting it down in front of everyone. He said Sophia was doing well, that she was funny and fierce and absolutely certain about everything, and the way he talked about her, with that specific mix of exhaustion and complete devotion, made something in my chest feel very warm and very sad at the same time. We exchanged numbers when we left. Just in case, he said, either of us found anything else that belonged to the other. We both knew that was not really why. He texted me 3 days later. Not about the suitcase. He asked if I wanted to have dinner sometime, and added, "Sophia has already decided you're nice, based on the fact that you took care of her drawing." I told her I hadn't actually confirmed that yet, and she said that anyone who sits on the floor holding a crayon drawing is definitely nice. I'm inclined to agree with her. I said yes. We had dinner that week, and then again the week after, and somewhere between the second and third month of knowing each other, without either of us making a formal announcement about it, we simply became part of each other's lives. Sophia started saving her drawings for when I came over. Daniel started knowing how I took my coffee without asking. And I started to understand what it felt like to come home to something real after a very long time of coming home to nothing but an empty apartment and a suitcase that needed unpacking. For months after I accidentally picked up the wrong bag at baggage claim, the three of us were standing together in that same airport. Daniel had planned a long weekend trip, somewhere warm, somewhere none of us had been before, somewhere that belonged only to the three of us and had no history attached to it. Sophia was wearing a backpack covered in star patches and pulling a tiny suitcase with both hands, and she had been talking continuously since we left the house about the plane and the clouds and whether the pilot would let her see the cockpit. We were standing at the check-in counter when she reached up and took my hand. Not because she needed anything, not because she was scared. Just because she wanted to. Daniel looked over at us, and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just looked at his daughter holding my hand in the middle of a busy airport, and then he looked at me, and he said, "You know, I used to hate airports." I looked at him and said, "And now?" He picked up Sophia's tiny suitcase with one hand and took my other hand with his, and he said, "Now they're my favorite place in the world." And then we walked through the doors together, the three of us, into whatever was waiting on the other side.